trying to get the timeline for Thunderbolt Mountain down a little bit. Per my notes, I've got that you'd have started it up around 88. I think that's the year that in like the magazines, like the Courier and stuff, they had mentioned that you were selling your limited edition sets. Would you have probably then started up the year before that?
I started sculpting probably a little before that, but not necessarily a year.
Okay.
Maybe as long as a year, I don't know.
And I know a lot of the original masters from that period are in the Raupartha master mold, so you contracted all that through them.
Yep.
And you'd said you did contract casting through various people.
Well, I used their equipment.
Okay. Was there anyone else you were using, or?
I definitely remember using somebody else's at the time, but I can't remember.
So you did a lot of the early casting yourself?
On those Kings of Elves and Kings of Men and Kings of Dwarves, yeah. But after that, I got my own equipment.
Gotcha. Was the first limited set the like mixed adventurers?
Right.
Okay. And was that before you did the CL floored and the Landsknecht with banner?
Those were done to see if whatchamacallit would be interested in Rockcliffe Pewter.
Okay.
Would be interested in them. And just as exercises. I mean, I did a lot of figures at that time from as early as 1978, 79. And you got to remember the date on the base of Raupartha figures doesn't necessarily correspond with the year they were made in.
Right.
Because we would keep using bases that were printed in 1978 until 1980, things like that. If it's a pre-printed base, if it's actually scratched into the bottom, then that's when it was made. Anyway, I was doing stuff from 1978 on, which was purely done for my own education in how to sculpt better.
Would that be like the 30 millimeter French Legionnaire?
I actually did him for somebody. It was a contract piece.
Really? Because Partha then sold him too.
Did they?
Yeah.
That's not good.
They did a small range called Partha Personalities, which had the what I would consider the prototype to the CL floor, the 54 millimeter elf with a big headdress. There was a 54 millimeter Norseman and the 54 millimeter Conan on a like corpse pile with a girl. Would those be the pieces you're thinking of there?
Yeah, well, no, those were earlier ones. Those were much were. Partha wanted to see if they could sell 54s. So I did so. Well, once we started doing things for Rockcliffe Pewter, they wanted larger pieces, and they were, selling tremendous amounts. So it was a very desirable thing to do. You can make more money making a piece for Rockcliffe Pewter, them selling them on, than you could from making something for the hobby trade selling it, because the hobby trade margin was so low.
Yeah.
Partha always operated on a very narrow margin.
So it was around, you'd say, 1990 that you moved to the factory building. And did you live there?
Yeah, it was an apartment.
Okay.
Up and behind it. Yeah.
And it was like a multi-level setup, wasn't it?
Three enormous floors. I never used more than one of them. I didn't even use one whole one. The total building size was, and this is not counting there was another building out back where the roof was falling in on that had originally been just for parking delivery trucks. Just the main building was, I think, 32,000 square feet.
Wow.
On 3 floors. It had originally been an Oldsmobile dealership, and was one of the first continuously poured concrete buildings in the world. The first one was built in Switzerland, and then when it didn't fall down, they started building them in other places. It was built by the same contractors that did the Elephant House at Cincinnati Zoo. But they built this continuously poured concrete building, and you were meant to drive, this is like 1920, you were meant to drive 1920 Oldsmobiles up onto all the different levels, and it was originally glass all around it, so you could see all the automobiles, but it was a 3-story car dealership.
So were there internal ramps?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
You could drive onto any floor.
Huh.
I know. You get on the alley to get on the basement floor, and then there was a ramp on the main door that opened that you could either turn onto the first floor or you could go up the ramp to the top floor.
Okay.
And the building was as sound as it could be. Had an architect looked at it before I bought it, and you know, because the concrete looked rotty in places. And after looking at it, he came to me and said, if they ever drop an atom bomb on Cincinnati, this is where I want to be. This building is not coming down.
Yeah. So when you bought that, you picked up equipment for Thunderbolt and moved in there.
Right.
Did you buy secondhand equipment from anybody or just get new?
No, I got new. As a matter of fact, I got some of the more advanced stuff that was available at the time.
Yeah, you had originally, you said you had one of those casting machines where you just like feed the mold into a slot, right? And did that come with its own complications as opposed to the type of machines Ralph Arthur was using?
It worked for a while really well, and then, you know, it didn't work so well. But we kept it going. They sent us the wrong schematics when it broke, and we tried to have it fixed. Nobody could figure it out, and it turned out, you know, that I took a good hard look at it, and they'd sent us the wrong electrical schematics for it. They sent it to a different machine. And so I'm looking through it and tracing the wires and going, that's not even here. You know? And then I figured out how it was supposed to work, and I rewired it to do that. And then it worked again for another few years.
Yeah. So in the mid-90s is when you moved into place. When did you, sometime in the mid to late 90s, you shut Thunderbolt down for a while, right?
Yeah, well, two things. One is I was originally supposed to go into operation with a partner who pulled out at the last minute. It wasn't that I didn't have enough money to finance the thing. It was that I couldn't both sculpt and do the other physical work and still manage employees. And I'm no good at managing people anyway. I tend to treat everyone as an equal. Everyone is just the same. And I've discovered that all that works for a small number of people when you have them working for you, a relatively small minority. But most other people get into a kind of a psychological relationship with their boss, and you know, I didn't want to play that role. I didn't want to play the role of boss.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, okay, this is what you need to do, and you understand how to do it. If you got any problems, you can come to me, and I'll help you. And do it. Now go off and do it. I've got things to do over here, and that didn't work out very well.
So the person who was going to be your partner, had they like helped talk you into the idea? Or?
Yeah, sort of, but it's okay. I mean, it was a personal thing. He couldn't do it, so. Yeah.
Had you gotten fairly far along in the process when you found out, okay, I'm going to be...
Bought the building.
Yeah, and that's after, when he disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
Were you married at the time?
Nope.
And when did you shut down Thunderbolt then?
I closed down the operation, I can't remember, probably like you said, about 1995, 1996. I ran it for about 5 years.
Okay.
Probably shut it down in 96.
Okay. Were you married by that point, or?
I think I either got married just after that. We were married for 26 years, so.
Yeah, I think about 1996.
Yeah. So it would have been
So somewhere
probably
in that
just
time.
before. I don't think it was operating well, but it was just before that I shut it down, 95 to 96.
Do you know about how many employees you had at the
peak?
height? Yeah.
I had about 8.
About 8.
Yeah.
Mostly other guys you had worked with at Ralph Arthur, or?
Nope, the only one that was somebody who'd worked with at Ralph Arthur was Brian Hitzman, the mold maker.
Did you have a tendency to hire friends, or finding more professional?
Usually just found people by, you know, somebody knew somebody who wanted a job. It wasn't like it was difficult work,
Right.
casting and packing and answering the phone or working on the computer.
Gotcha.
Like I hired the sister of my accountant who'd just gotten out of the Army. I hired a guy who could do photographs so that we could have photographic stuff as well. And I contracted out some things as well.
Did you do the original logos for the company?
Yes, I designed it. I didn't necessarily set it up.
Gotcha. So you closed down in 96, and then you moved here about 2000, is that right?
Right.
And was it as you moved here or after you'd been here a while?
As you can see, I got this bank of computers here.
Right.
There were at one time 6 of them, and we had a group of 6 people who would come together and play multiplayer games on a computer. He was one of the people, I mean, I've known John since I started wargaming, but he was one of the people that came over to do it, and he had just retired, and, you know, we just got to talking about it, saying that, you know, this would probably pay, it would be work you could do whenever you felt like it, really, and, you know, certainly well within his capacities. He's a very intelligent man, and it would just be some extra pocket money if he was interested. And he said, sure, and so we did, and he ran it that way for a while, until he started having medical problems, and he shut it down again.
Yeah. So would that have been like 03 or 05 when you guys would have started up again?
Yeah, probably, something like that. The order in for Thunderbolt Mountain, the order was the Kings series. The Swan ship was a big project. Then I did the Dragons, which were mainly aimed at Rawcliffe to sell them as soldered together pieces. And then I did the Arthurians.
Okay.
And it was only then that I started to do the Elf line as a reaction, as I said, to the release. You could probably look up whenever the release of the films was and get the year from that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think 03 is probably the earliest scratching on a base for those, I think, that I've seen. Did the fairies come out fairly late in your first run as Thunderbolt?
No, they were fairly early. Again, that was something for Rawcliffe.
Okay.
The large-scale fairies, yeah.
So then in the 2000s, you had, of course, the 30mm line, and that was the first thing you really started up again with?
Right.
And did the Byzantines come along a little later on that? Or
Yeah, I
did
did
they
them after I did the elves and the goblins. It was the first things I did with elves and goblins, and then I started doing humans.
And then would the Sparkle and Savage have probably been the next thing?
That was done intermittently after my children were about 6 and 4, respectively. When they started, you know, I tried to get them interested in gaming in various ways, although they never took to it. But they did have their own imaginary games that they would talk about. Mainly when we were driving around in the car, they would taunt each other with their imaginary forces and things. And so Theo's were fairly oddball and sophisticated and grotesque, and Nora's answers were pretty much what you'd expect from a 4 or 5-year-old girl. Magical ballerina princesses, fairy princesses, magical ballerina fairy princesses, and pink pony.
Steve up at Armorcast in Northern Ohio, he's the guy who won the eBay auction for it's like anime schoolgirl with hamster.
Oh, right,
guy.
yeah.
Was that something that was originally planned for the Sparkle and Savage line or not?
Nope, that was something that my wife suggested to me. She would periodically suggest things to me to make, just whimsically.
Mm-hmm.
And most of these were impractical for some reason or weren't things I was interested in. And then she came up with that one with a Japanese schoolgirl with a gun that shoots hamsters. And you know, that was her suggestion, and then I designed around that suggestion a repeating hamster. I didn't want to produce it particularly,
Gotcha.
so I just wanted to see what people would pay for it, or buy it for. I did several figures that I sold like that as well. I did Shane as a Western gunfighter from the movie. I did a pirate figure that Hasselfree bought.
Really?
And sold those at auction, but the only one that actually sold over what I'd have got for it if I had done it to contract was the one that Hasselfree bought. A pirate figure. Wish they named a pirate Captain Tom.
Well, there you go. When did you start working for Dark Sword?
He contacted me in about 2004 or so, I want to say, 2004, 2005. He wanted me to do sculptures of various artists who'd worked for TSR that he had gotten the rights to do figures for.
Specifically Elmore, right?
Elmore was probably more than, at first it was Parkinson mainly,
Okay.
and then it was Elmore. But I've probably done more Elmore now than I did Parkinson. And the reason why I'd done that Bakish Ba
Yeah.
figure for Partha,
Mm-hmm.
and Elmore was very pleased with that apparently, so he was glad to work with me because he thought he'd get a good job done on his fantasy paintings.
Yeah.
So that had helped with to Dark Sword to get the rights to do the things, because obviously most of these artists aren't going to get much for royalties on a figure, but
Right.
they want to see that it's done in a reasonable quality.
Gotcha. And then,
That's what helped him to get the George Martin Game of Thrones thing.
yeah,
as well.
didn't you say, so I thought I'd heard that Martin had requested that you work on the project? Is that?
I think so, yeah. He'd gotten word, he'd seen some stuff I'd done, somebody else gave him. He's a big collector of 54 millimeter figures. And he recognized these would have to be smaller, but he was very pleased.
And then the French and Indian War came a couple years later, right?
The French, these were all attempts, those in the Napoleonic caricature figures, were all attempts by me to get my son interested in gaming, which never stuck. No matter what I did, it never interested him at all. So, the Napoleonic figures, I actually have some old spring-loaded cannons from back in the good old days when they didn't worry about kids putting their eye out with their toys. These would shoot a little plastic pellet all the way across the room. And I was going to try and see if I could get him interested in, playing with plastic figures where you shoot them and knock them down. You're marching across the carpet and you shoot at them, just like that was the original Little Wars that H.G. Wells, that's what he did. He shot at them with cannons. But although he liked shooting them over with cannons, he never really was interested in rules. Rules are for fools. He wasn't that interested. So the French and Indian War were another attempt to, because I was trying to connect it to this area, where there was stuff going on in the French and Indian War.
Did the Napoleonics come, did you do those first?
Yes.
Okay. And Teddy Bear Picnic, is that an older piece?
Yes, it's pretty old. I did that once again for Rawcliffe.
Okay.
And I don't know where that came from, the idea for it, but...
Was it around the time you were experimenting with like dollhouse?
I was doing a few
utensils and
yeah,
stuff?
it is dollhouse scale, so yeah, maybe that was it. I did a beautiful set of cutlery for a dollhouse thing. I was going to have them cast in actual silver, because the dollhouse people, some of them are crazy. They'll buy actual silver and gold statuary, but there are some very good sculptors working in lost wax in the dollhouse thing. When I took the cutlery to a guy who, big warehouse supply thing there, he was very impressed with them. He thought they looked good, but didn't know how to go about manufacturing them, and didn't think you'd sell that many if you put them out. But he showed me some animalier bronzes back in Edwardian times. No middle-class household was complete without statues sitting around the house of a stag being torn by hounds, or a horse rearing or something. And this German fellow had made these in lost wax, and they were lovely. They were as good as any figure work I've ever seen, and he really understood animal anatomy too. Excellent. But they were done to the dollhouse scale, so a stag would be maybe 2 inches tall.
And then the nativity set that you had out for a while, when did you start working on that?
Ooh, I don't remember. I made the original set just because my relatives were all hounding me that they didn't possess any, they try and explain to their friends what I did for a living, but they didn't have anything to show them, to do this. But
Gotcha.
so I said, okay, fine, I'll make something, and then sold it as well. And it sold really well. I was kind of surprised. But I originally made it up just to give as gifts, at Christmas time to members of my family in all directions, so that when they tried to explain what their brother say, well, he made these.
That makes sense.